Well, I cannot remember exactly, but it was, as best as I can remember, probably around the late summer or early fall of 2001 when the secretary at the ministry where I was working gave me a glucose meter. Why did she do that? Well, she knew I was having some severe blood sugar issues. She figured that out. Her husband was diabetic, and she could see some of those symptoms in me. Well, I had no idea what was going on. I thought it might have something to do with diabetes. And so she taught me how to use it. It took a little while, and I messed up for the first few times I tried to get a reading, but I'm an old hand at it. I've been doing it since then. So what is that? That's like 23 years almost by now. I've done it a lot of times, and I want to teach you. I wasn't doing it very long before I quickly got fascinated by the idea of finding out how foods and meals affected my blood sugar. It wasn't enough for me just to test in the morning and say, okay, I woke up with a 122 or a 115 or a 135. What got me the most interested, and I was just almost obsessed with it, was the idea that my blood sugar may be at a pretty decent level and I eat a meal and suddenly it jumps way up there, but then other meals, I don't jump up much at all. I just found that fascinating. And so I began to test my blood sugar after various meals and note how certain foods affected my blood sugar. So right now I am about to have a meal to kind of demonstrate this principle, but before I have the meal, I'm going to do a pre-meal test. That's where you test your glucose to see where you are before you eat the meal. And we have the glucose meter. We lovingly and affectionately call him Mike the meter. Now, this one is a Freestyle Precision Neo. I am often asked, what do I like? Well, this is the one I use more than any other for two reasons. Number one, it seems to be fairly accurate. And number two, the test strips are fairly cheap. The meter itself is fairly cheap, so about $20 US where I live to buy the meter and about another $20 to buy 50 test strips. So once you get the meter, you're in good shape and it should last you a long time. Now, these meters have batteries. A lot of people get fooled and the battery goes out and they say, well, my meter no longer works, and they toss it in the trash and buy a new meter. But chances are your meter works just fine. You just need a new battery for it. Each meter will have a different way of putting in a battery and different batteries that they'll use. So anyway, you need a meter. You need test strips. Now, this Precision Neo, they come wrapped individually. Most of them will not. A lot of them will have a little container that will have 25 or 50 test strips. But this one has them wrapped individually. And then you have this thing, which is the needle that's going to stick your finger. This is called a lancing device. And if you pull off the front, you can see there is a needle, and that is meant to be changed. Normally the idea is every time you stick yourself, you change to a new needle. Now, I got to be honest, I don't always do that because I'm the one that uses this, and I'm the only one. Now, if I was sharing a device, which you shouldn't be doing anyway, but if I was, then I would change out the needle. But there's no reason to share one of these devices anyway. And one other thing that people need to notice is that there are these little marks on here, and every device is going to have something like this, that you can adjust the depth to which that needle goes in. You do not need the needle to go in deeper than what it has to do to provide you a drop of blood. And so one of the reasons a lot of people find it painful to stick their fingers with one of these lancing devices is that they've got that needle set too deep, so you can adjust it. You set it too shallow, you won't get any kind of a decent-sized drop of blood. You may get no blood at all. And you set it too deep, it'll be painful. So you want to kind of find that middle ground. Start out right in the middle around, this one has 5 marks, so start in on mark 3, and then if you need to go deeper, you can. Chances are when you first get that, in fact, almost certainly when you first buy your lancing device and you try to stick your finger, there'll be no blood because there's no needle in it. So you've got to find a way to take it the end off and put in a needle. They do it differently. They won't all do it this way. This one, it just pops off and then you put it back the same way. Pops back on. You always, almost all of them, you pull back, and that kind of sets it, and then the little trigger is here, and you push that, and there you go. Now, why was I having trouble getting a good drop of blood those first few times? Well, I can't remember back far enough to know for sure, but most likely the reason I was having trouble is the reason most people have trouble getting a decent drop of blood. Well, there's two reasons. Either A, they've got it set too shallow and the needle doesn't go in deep enough, but probably the biggest reason is they're a little nervous about it. So they barely touch it to their skin, and then it just doesn't go in at all, or just barely. So you got to be a real man or a real woman about this, and you push it right up against the skin of one of your fingers, and you push it nice and hard and firm, and then it'll go in deep enough. And by the way, one thing that will mitigate the pain quite a bit is to put this up against the edge of your finger, the front part, and it doesn't have to be the index finger. It could be any. I wouldn't advise your little finger, your pinky. Thumb can work, but you put it up against the edge rather than the flat part of your finger. You put it up against the edge, and it won't hurt as much normally. So let's go through the process to see where I am pre-meal, and then I'm going to have my meal, and I'll talk to you about that. And don't forget, when you do this, start by washing your hands and especially that finger you plan to stick. So the first step with this particular meter is to take this out of its package. Like I said, most of them do not come in a wrapped package. The normal way to do it is to go ahead and stick this in. You have to do it the right way. If I put it in this way, it'd be upside down. It wouldn't work. But these little metal strips are going to go in this way. You stick it in, and it should show you a response of some kind. Here we go. I was almost afraid it wouldn't. Right now, it shows a drop of blood on the meter. That's telling you it's ready to receive the drop of blood. Now, you don't have to be in a huge hurry. You don't have to feel like the minute you see that, you've got to quickly do everything. You can just set it down casually and then cock the back end of your lancing device, press it up against the side of your finger, press it nice and firm, bam, there you go. And I always squeeze it because a lot of times it won't show enough blood. Now I'm getting enough of a drop of blood here. I know this should work unless I really mess up. So we got a drop of blood. We've got this already prepared and it's showing the drop on the meter. And I'll just press this up against the drop of blood. And it instantly changes. In this particular meter, it changes, and then it starts a countdown. I can just set this down, wipe the blood off my finger, and it gives me a 100. A 100. So that's my pre-meal. That'll be easy to figure, right? If I go up to 128, then that means I had a 28-point rise. This is a pre-meal test. I'll have to be honest, after a while, when I saw that most of my pre-meal numbers were pretty similar, within a 15-point range or so, a lot of times I'd skip the pre-meal part. I'd just be curious, what's the peak? Where is my blood sugar going to rise to and peak out at, and then it'll start going back down? And in those days, I found it was about an hour after I ate, but that can depend on what foods I would eat. So some foods will give you a quicker peak. Some will take it much longer. The absolute fastest way to get a blood sugar peak is drink a soda. I mean, you can get a peak in about 35, 45 minutes with a soda. A baked potato is very similar. It'll give you a lightning fast peak. Things like beans and pasta will be much slower. So you kind of have to set your peak that way. So anyway, I know I'm at 100 before I eat. I'm going to have my meal, and then I'm going to wait about an hour and 10 minutes for this particular test, and we'll come back and show you where I end up. Well, I've had a magnificent dinner of a pork steak and a salad, and that salad was loaded with lots of good stuff, a lot of low-carb vegetables and green peppers. I love green peppers. And I threw on some walnuts and several blackberries. I think it was just 3, but they were large ones, so I cut them in pieces. And that was just a delicious salad. So I had, for me, what amounts to a fairly big meal, especially considering this is my dinner meal. I normally do not eat that much for dinner, but for the sake of this test, I did. And right now it is about an hour and 10 minutes after I finished eating. A lot of people wonder, when is the best time to test? Well, I'm looking for the peak. And so for me, the best time to test for most foods is between an hour and 15 minutes after I finish eating. Now, my glucose may remain elevated for a little while after that, but I'm looking for the peak. So once again, using the Freestyle Precision Neo, I am going to test my blood sugar right here on camera and see what we get. So we get a 94. Well, considering I had a 100 not too long before I ate, my blood sugar went down rather than up. So think about that, folks. To me, that's exciting. I mean, I'm kind of a nerd and kind of a strange fella because I can get so excited. But think of it. Here is a full meal that I ate, thoroughly enjoyed myself. I didn't suffer. I wasn't sacrificing. I had that pork steak with some sugar-free barbecue sauce on it. I had the salad with some ranch dressing, low-carb ranch dressing, and filled myself up quite thoroughly, had a cup of coffee afterwards, and lo and behold, at an hour and 10 minutes, I'm lower than I was not so long before I started that meal. So that's what got me so excited. When I started doing tests like this, way back around 2002 and 2001, when I started doing that and realizing there were some meals I could enjoy, and yet they hardly did anything to my blood sugar, and there were other meals that did a whole lot to my blood sugar, well, you can guess which way I went with all of that. And that led me squarely into the low-carb camp because I found out it's the carbs, baby, it's the carbs. Politically, in America, we have a saying, it's the economy, stupid. Well, I'm too nice to call anyone stupid, but I will say it's the carbs. It is the carbs that make all the difference. Now, to prove that, we're going to have a high-starch meal next time around. It may be a couple days for me, but you're going to see it almost immediately. And we'll see how a high-starch meal affects me. Will my blood sugar go down like this time? I don't think so, but don't touch that dial. We'll check it out. Well, here is my meal for part B of this test. Macaroni and cheese and baked potato. I haven't had macaroni and cheese in I don't know how long, maybe 15 years, I don't know. Baked potatoes I've had a couple of times just for beat diabetes, and here I go again. I think the last time I had a baked potato, I said, well, I may never have one again. Here I am. But to make a point for you, I'm going to deliberately raise my blood sugar using a starchy meal. Now, I want you to notice that neither one of these two foods, the baked potato and the macaroni and cheese, is sweet. There's no sweet taste. It doesn't matter which one I eat. Tastes pretty good, by the way. No sweetness, so it's like the Trojan horse. It's sneaking sugar into your body surreptitiously. In other words, both of these have lots of sugar in them, but they're chain molecules of sugar that are not technically sugar. So you could say, is a baked potato sugar? No. Is macaroni and cheese sugar? No. But they're made of chain molecules of sugar, and the minute they hit your stomach, boom, they turn into sugar and raise your blood sugar significantly. How much will this raise my blood sugar? I don't know. Now, I know we'll have a few complaints. You'll say, well, looks like you put butter on the baked potato. I did. You say, why did you do that? That spoils the experiment. It's not an experiment, really. It's just to point out the difference between two types of meal. A starchy meal, like this one, versus a non-starchy meal, like the first one. It should make a significant difference. So I'm going to go enjoy this. It will taste good to me. And I'll be back about an hour and 10 minutes after eating to see what it did to my blood sugar levels. It has been about an hour and 10 minutes since I finished my meal of a fairly good-sized baked potato and some macaroni and cheese, about a cup's worth. So we're going to find out how I did. And I don't feel any different. I don't feel weird. I don't feel strange. Neither did I feel weird or strange or different when I ate the steak and the salad. So you can't always tell by feeling. Sometimes you can. If your blood sugar drops too low, well, I can definitely feel that. But if it's going high, you normally wouldn't feel it. Some people do, or they say they do, but I don't. So let's see what we get. Counting down the 5 seconds, which is a lot better than it used to be. I think when I first started testing, it was 30 seconds or more. So I've got a 175. Let me take a picture of that. I'll come back and share some concluding remarks. There is actually a little more to the story. After I got that 175 reading, I became curious as to what would happen to my glucose in another hour, which would be 2 hours and 10 minutes after finishing that meal. So I tested myself at that time, and I was surprised that my glucose had actually risen to 206 milligrams per deciliter, which would be around 11.4 millimoles, and that was 2 hours and 10 minutes after finishing the meal of a baked potato and macaroni and cheese. Now, that was a surprise to me. I don't get a lot of surprises when I test my glucose, but that was. Knowing how fast potatoes spike glucose, I really thought my blood sugar would be on the way back down by then. But then I thought about the macaroni and cheese and realized that this was the culprit that kept my glucose rising later than usual. Pasta is a much slower-acting carbohydrate. It takes longer to produce a glucose spike, and it takes longer for your blood sugar to begin its descent back to normal. So with that meal of a baked potato and macaroni and cheese, I was really getting the worst of both worlds. The potato got my glucose up high quickly, and the mac and cheese kept it high longer. Then I decided, well, let's just try it again about an hour later after that, which would be about 3 hours after eating. And this time I had a 180 milligrams per deciliter, still much too high, especially considering this was 3 hours after I finished eating. This meant that I was in the metabolic death zone for several hours after that meal, which is a very, very bad thing. Many people suggest that since we're all different, well, blood sugar tests like this one don't really mean very much because others would get different results. Well, they would get different numbers for sure, but the essential results would be the same. It would not matter whether you were black or white, old or young, tall or short, fat or skinny, American or Chinese, outgoing or introverted, brilliant or not very bright, type 1 diabetic, type 2 diabetic, pre-diabetic, or not even close to diabetic. Virtually everyone who compared those two dinners, a non-starchy meal versus a very starchy meal, would all get a higher glucose spike from the starchy meal than they would from the non-starchy meal. And if you don't believe that, well, just run that test on yourself and see what happens to you. Here is the reality. Starches turn into sugar rapidly, and sugar raises blood glucose. It happens just as certainly as the sun rises in the morning and sets in the evening. It is a fixed law of nature. Understanding this truth has broken the chains of diabetes over millions of lives. When people really get it, diabetics do not need to be told to watch their sugar, which has been the standard advice, and that has never worked and never will work. They need to learn to slash the carbs in their diet, both the sugar carbs and the starch carbs, from hundreds of grams per day and 70 grams per meal, way down to about 50 grams or less per day, and definitely no more than 20 grams per meal. That will make for the fast train to victory. This is where things get exciting in a hurry, and you find your A1C and your average glucose scores headed down toward the normal range. Some of you may be saying, okay, Dennis, these tests were so simple, you didn't show us anything new. Maybe you didn't learn anything new, but I can guarantee there are some newly diagnosed diabetics who found this simple video absolutely eye-opening and life-transforming. I wish I could send this little video back to the Dennis of 2001, whose blood sugar was totally out of control. Had I been able to see a video like this one back in those days, it would have explained so much that I needed to know, and I could have made so much faster progress. For someone to have taken me aside and played this little video for me and then answered a few basic questions that I might have had would have been an absolute game changer. Well, I can't do anything for the Dennis of 2001. He had to learn things the slow way, by trial and error and reading a few books and taking hundreds and eventually thousands of blood sugar tests on himself. But you? Well, you can learn what you need to do a whole lot faster than that Dennis that I was in 2001. Thank God for the knowledge that has surfaced since those ancient days. Thank God for YouTube. And thank God for Mike, your friendly little neighborhood glucose meter, who will lead you into freedom from the terrible scourge of diabetes. If you've recently been diagnosed with diabetes and you've just discovered this channel, let me recommend that you go to our Uploads page, which will give you access to every diabetic video we've posted since we began. As you work your way through all our videos, I believe you'll find the help you need. A link to our Uploads page is in the description.